All right, so today we're going to work on exercise 205, which you all got the handouts for. And I think it's important to kind of explain why I'm making you do certain things. And essentially what we're going to do for the next couple lectures in Rhino, I'm going to give you a very scripted, we're going to build this object, and I want you to learn this set of tools, which is why we're building this object. So even though this little bridge component is not the most attractive thing in the world, it's designed to make you think through certain problems and learn how to work within the context of Rhino to build certain things. The exercise 206, which you'll do next week, is similar, where it's very scripted. This is what we're building. We're going the direction of having these couple very scripted exercises, and then we'll break out into giving you more autonomy about how do I model something. So we'll move into where I give you, hey, we're going to model a window. These are kind of the general parameters of the window, but you have to figure out how to actually do it. So I start off very scripted, and then we move more and more into you figure out what's the right way of you doing it versus me telling you these are the steps to follow. Because ultimately, as a designer, you have to be able to make whatever is in your head. And I can't give you a set of steps for what's in your head. So it's important that you learn kind of how to adapt these skills for something that you're trying to do on your own. But we also have to learn the skills in the first place. So for today's exercise 205, it is rather scripted. And unfortunately, that means it's a little bit more boring than when you have complete flexibility on your own. If you want to embellish it and make a few changes, I'm not opposed to it. But be aware that, at least I need you to get these certain skills down and feel comfortable with those skills. There are a few problems with this, and they're on purpose. They're meant for you to have to deal with them, and I'll show you how to work through them. That will take more time than actually building the object. For the most part, building an object's relatively simple. It's solving the problems of things that don't work. So I'm going to go ahead and open Rhino. And this will be a brand new Rhino document. So in the new tab, I'm going to do a large object inches as my base template. Maybe. There we go. And for today, I don't need the V-Ray toolbars yet, so I'm not going to worry about loading them just yet. When I get into doing the V-Ray materials, which I will do later on toward the end of the lecture, at that point I'll go ahead and load them, but I'm not going to worry about it for right now. I'm also going to make sure that my object snap is turned on. I have end, mid, and perpendicular turned on for my object snaps. I'm going to make sure that my standard toolbar or tab is showing with all of these tools. So this is essentially what you should be seeing for what we're creating right now. We're going to start by drawing the drawing that's on the bottom of the little handout here. And I've given you measurements. Those measurements are in inches. And I think it's important to think through how you're drawing this. And this is, if you remember back to that second day of class when I was talking about coordinate system, this is where that coordinate system can actually play in as you start to draw. And so I'll show you how I would go about drawing it. And then I'll point out the places where that coordinate system are valuable. So I'm going to start with the Polyline tool, which is the tool directly below the white arrow here. And I'll click on the Polyline tool to start. Now, I can draw in the perspective view, or I can draw in the top view. Either of these is just fine. It's dependent on what you feel most comfortable in. For our purposes, since I'm drawing flat, I'll go ahead and start drawing in the top view. And I'm going to start at point 0, 0, which is right here at the origin, right there. And I'll do that by typing in 0, 0 as my starting point. And there we go. I'm going to go ahead and turn on ortho so that I stay in a line as I start to create this. And I'm going to go up by the first dimension, which was 36 inches, though technically if this was code, it would be 42. But I did this before the code changed, so it is what it is. So we'll do 36 inches. And there it is. So I've drawn that first straight line. Now I'm going to go over by 4 inches, like this. And that's my second line. The outside slopes down. So I'm going down 36 inches and over 2 inches. This is a little bit tricky unless I use those coordinates. So here's a point where doing a distance and a direction isn't quite good enough. I need those coordinate systems. So if I did the at sign, that would say relative to the last point that I just picked, this would be at, it would be -2 inches. So I'm going to the left in the x direction, followed by -36 in the y direction. So it's at -2, oops, sorry, comma, -36. and I'll go ahead and hit enter. That then gives me that sloping line on the outside. Alternatively, if I was over here, I could draw that part, I could hit return, I could say, okay, well, from here, I could go over 2 inches, and then I could go down 36 inches, and then I could come over and I could draw a line from here to there, and then I could get rid of this line, and then I could join these together, and then I could keep drawing. But that took a whole lot of extra steps to get to the same place. Where if I get used to the idea of the coordinate system, I can be in process as I'm drawing, and I can just flip to the coordinates and then go back to keep doing my distance and direction. So I'm going to start fresh one more time just to emphasize this. 0, 0 is my starting point. I'm going to go up by 36 inches. There it is. I'm going to go over by 4 inches. There it is. Now I'm going to use the coordinate system. I'm going to say at. This time it's -2 in the x, comma, -36 in the y. Enter. That gives me the sloping side, the outside. Now I go straight down by 6 inches. Yeah?
Couldn't you also hypothetically do like just -6, -36?
If yes, if it would actually be -36, 0, if it was absolute coordinates. Because we'd be going back down to -6, 0, because it would be at the axis. But anyway, yes, you could, as long as your origin started at point 0 or 0, 0. So if you're off floating in space, use the relative coordinates, then you don't have to worry about, well, wait a minute, where it is. Where is it? It's just relative to the last point. So as I continue, I'd go down 6 inches. So that's just distance and direction. There it is. Now this next one, here's another perfect example of using those coordinates. So I would use the at sign, and it would be the x direction first, which was 30 inches, and it's positive, so I'm going toward the right. And it would be in the y direction -6 inches, so I put -6. So it would be at 30, -6. And I'd hit enter, and that gives me the sloping bottom that I'm drawing here. If I continued up, I would be going up the other side. So this would be at 30 again, comma, +6, because I'm going back up. Enter. We'd go up 6 inches, distance and direction. Then this one would be, again, the at sign, -2 in the x, followed by 36 in the y. It's +36 again. So at -2, 36. And then we can go over the 4. We can go down the 36. And then we can come back to where we started from. And that ultimately creates this shape, which is the shape I'm asking you to create here on your drawing as well. Alternatively, I could draw half of it. I could start and draw and end here and then mirror it. That would be another strategy. I will show you ultimately how I would go about building this piece, which involves some mirroring, which means you're only building a quarter of the piece, not the whole thing. But I'll show you that at the end, because the more at this stage of the game, the more practice you have, the better off you're going to be. So dealing with all the corners is better than dealing with one corner and mirroring. So now that I've created this shape, which is the first goal and is identified in part 1, we're going to use Rotate 3D to make this stand up in the 3rd dimension. So I'm going to double-click out of the top view and double-click into the perspective view, so I can now see this in 3 dimensions here. And I'm going to use a Rotate 3D to take this shape and pull it up so it's standing vertically. So I'll go up to my transform, and I'll go to Rotate 3D. There it is. It's asking me for the start of the rotation axis. The rotation axis is going to be right along this line here. So I'll go from this point to this point. There's the start of my rotation axis. Then it's going to ask me for the angle or first reference point. So the reference point is essentially I want to go flat and I want to pull that up. So I'll just go out this side and I'll pull it till it stands up like that. That's what I'm looking for. So once again, we'll do that Rotate 3D just for repetitive purposes here. Rotate 3D. There's my object. I press Enter. And then I'm going to use my start of rotation axis and my end of rotation axis right along that. And my reference point is right up here. And I want that to stand up. Remember, if I didn't have ortho turned on, I could pick any angle that I wanted. But I want it to be 90 degrees, so I might as well turn on ortho. The other thing is if you don't have ortho turned on and you hold down the shift key, it will automatically jump to 90 degrees. So if you don't have ortho on and you want to jump to that 90 degrees, you can go ahead and press shift, and it will jump up to that 90 degrees like that. Just another keyboard shortcut for you. So now that this is standing up in its third dimensions, I'm going to go ahead and use the offset command, which we've used before, to create a second copy of this over here. Now I could just do a regular copy, and I could say I want this to be 4 feet back like that. That's a perfectly valid way of creating the second copy of the object. But I can also use the offset command, which is available under curve, offset, offset curve. Or I could type in offset into the command line. It's going to ask me the distance. In our case, the distance would be 48. Select curve to offset. I'm going to click on this. Now I've got a little bit of a problem here. So when I've done that, notice that it would make the object go out to the side, not back. So in that context, when I go back in here and I repeat the offset, I have a couple things that matter. One, if I come down here, there's something called in C-plane. Right now it's set to no. If I click on that, you see that it's now going back. So in C-plane is set to yes, and it's now going back rather than going out to the side. So I want to make sure that in C-plane is set to yes. The C-plane is something we'll spend a lot of time talking about. It's a little bit too advanced for you guys right now. We'll get to it a little bit later on in the semester. So for right now, just trust that it needs to say in C-plane yes. So we're already good there. I'm going to go ahead and offset to this side so that it's going back. Now again, that's the same thing as if I copied it. And there's no harm in using the copy command instead. I'm just trying to show you a variety of ways of getting to the same place. And you'll learn as you go through Rhino that you're more comfortable with certain strategies, and you'll use those strategies more than others. So I went ahead and I have my second copy like that. In step 4, I ask you guys to explode these curves. And you don't technically have to. And we can perform the loft as one. But performing the loft in separate steps is going to teach you more about doing the loft command. And it's going to repeat the loft command more to get you more comfortable with it. So that's why I'm suggesting that you explode these. So I'll select them both. I'm selecting from right to left to select everything that my selection touches. And I'll go up to Edit and then Explode. And now all of these lines are individual line segments. I'm going to select 2 opposing line segments. So in this case, this line, I'll hold down Shift and select that line. And with those 2 line segments selected, I can go ahead and use the Loft command to create a surface between them. So I'll go up to Surface and then Loft. And that then builds a surface right here. I'd like to see that surface as if it were solid, so I'm going to switch my view from wireframe into shaded by clicking on the triangle next to my view name and switching over to shaded. There it is. And then I'll continue by selecting opposite sides, so there, and I'll go up to Surface, Loft. And I can work my way around the rest of these lines. I could also type Loft, etc. Now, if these had been joined, I could do a loft from just these 2 objects. So I can take this and this. I can go up to Surface and then Loft. This is where those arrows have to be pointing in the same direction. They are pointing in the same direction. And I can go ahead and hit Enter. And it's going to go all the way around my object, creating all the surfaces at once. If those arrows aren't the same, so let's say that they're not on the same corner, they're going like this. See how one's going the opposite direction? When I go ahead and initiate the Loft command, it's very much not going to look like what I want it to look like. So sometimes the easiest way of explaining it is to do it wrong. So we'll go back and we'll try that one more time. Loft. There's my 2 curves. there's my two objects. Now, I also could run into the circumstance where they're like this. Oops. Let me not hit enter quite yet. Where they're pointing in the same direction, but they're not starting at the same point on the opposite sides. When I do this, it's a little bit different result. Essentially, it's connecting this point, and then building twisting surfaces from there. So it's not a self-intersecting curve that I just created, where they go opposite each other. This time it is still technically a viable object. It's just a really weird one. So once again, I don't want that. I want it to be opposite each other. So we'll go back and go to Surface and then Loft. They're on the same point. They're facing the same direction. Perfect. I can hit Enter and then OK. And now I have surfaces that go all the way around my object. It's good. The next thing I need to do is I need to draw in surfaces for the ends. And I suggest drawing a few guide curves to help you out. You don't technically have to. The curves that I'm talking about would be a curve that goes across straight there, and another curve that goes down to right there. By the way, when I was just drawing like that, sometimes I do this. If you have a command active, so let's say that I draw this line, this polyline from here to here, and I hit Enter to finish the command. If I right-click, it will repeat the last command that I just did. So rather than go up and pick polyline, you can just right-click and it'll repeat the last command. Sometimes I do that out of habit, and I don't tell you. And so I apologize for that. I try really hard always to initiate it. In this case, I'm going to right-click to repeat the polyline, and I can go from there to there. Those guidelines are just breaking this up into separate segments that I'm going to ultimately create surfaces for. Now, what I did in my example was I did patches. So in this case, I had this exploded, and I said, OK, I'm going to take this curve. I'm holding down Shift, that curve, and this curve. I will join them and then patch. And we'll do 2 by 2. And that then creates this surface on the end. The truth is, it's probably a little bit easier if you used the surface from 3 or 4 corner points and just pick the corners. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the surface from 3 or 4 corner points there. And we'll do 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it makes that surface. When I get down here, I'm going to do another surface from 3 or 4 corner points. And it's going to be 1, 2, and just 3. And I'll hit Enter. It's creating that little triangle. I will continue again and do 1, this time to the middle, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, and 3. Hit Enter. And 1, 2, 3, and 4. And essentially what I've been able to do now is put surfaces on the end of this object. I'll have to do the same thing for the backside, although I can use mirror or I can use copy to use the same surfaces again. So I could hold down Shift and select all of them. I could go to Edit and then Copy. Transform and then Copy. And we could go from here right down to there and create a copy on the backside. Let me make that one. So there I made a mistake when I created this. Fix that. 1, 2, and 3. That also means that this one has a mistake in it. So let's do 1, 2, and 3. There we go. So I've created the surfaces on each side. So this is the bulk of the shape that we're trying to create, but we need to start to add detail to this particular shape. And if this were a concrete bridge, these sharp corners would have a tendency in practice to chip, or when you pulled the forms off, they would tend to break at the corners. So typically what's done on concrete, and you could see it, a perfect example of it is the little planter that's sitting right outside here. You probably never paid any attention to it, but you're going to learn something new right now. The edges of that concrete have little angles on them that are called chamfers. They're there because of this same problem. If you did it straight, it would have a tendency to chip on the corners, or when you pulled the formwork off, it would chip then and it would look ugly. So we don't do those corners out of comfort. We do those corners out of function and buildability of the particular object, though they do kind of help in the comfort department too. Not quite as sharp. So we're going to do that same kind of a chamfer. And you guys, if you take your break later on, you can go look at the kinds of things we're doing because it's a perfect example sitting outside of what I'm showing you right now. So I'm going to use the chamfer command. It is not the regular chamfer. It's not under curve. We're going to be chamfering surfaces. So when we type it in, it's called chamfer SRF. It's also available under the surface menu called chamfer surfaces. So once again, it's chamfer SRF or chamfer surfaces. Now, before I actually do any chamfers, I need to adjust the distances. And what it means by distances are, if I was drawing it, sometimes it's easier just to draw, and I had my corner like this, and I want to clip the corner right here, the distance it's referring to is this distance and this distance here. Typically they're even. The one outside is even, and the one outside is 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch. Right now it's asking me for 1 inch, so I'm going to change it to 1/2 inch to match that. This doesn't have to be symmetrical. You could do 1/2 inch by 1 inch or whatever it is that you wanted conceptually. So when you get to your assignment, your first assignment, and you start doing these kinds of things, you could very easily choose to change the chamfer out of the look or whatever. So first thing I'm going to do is change the distances. It's not going to be 1 and 1. The distances are going to be 0.5 and 0.5. And then it's asking me to select the first surface to chamfer. So we'll start right over here, and we're going to chamfer this surface to that surface. And you see that when I do it, it makes that nice little bevel on the edge. We're going to go back to chamfer surface again. And there it is. And we're going to chamfer the top to the inside. All right, looks pretty good so far. I'll go ahead and chamfer this to this. So I'll right-click to repeat the last command, and I'll chamfer from here to there. Okay, looks pretty good, but wait a minute, look at the corner. See how there's an extra little piece of surface that's hanging out there and whatever? Those are the kinds of things we're going to have to fix. And so we'll leave it for right now. I'm going to continue on with my chamfer. So back up to surface and then chamfer surfaces. We'll do this face and that face. And I'll go back to chamfer surfaces, and I'll do this face and that face. So now if I start to zoom in on this, my corner's kind of ugly. I got a bunch of intersecting surfaces, and part of the purpose of today is you're going to have to learn how to manipulate and work within Rhino to see what's happening in 3 dimensions. And so in this case, I have a surface that's kind of a trapezoid shape here, where this is extending out straight. I have another surface that's straight, extending out straight. It's not angled. And I have this surface coming up here that actually ends pretty much where it's supposed to end. So what I need to do is I need to figure out where this exists in the middle such that I can trim off those extra pieces. And so I'll use a polyline. And the easiest way of doing this is to go from each corner. So I'll go from that corner to that corner, down to that corner, and back. And so I've created this triangle right here that is exactly where the corner is going to be. If you go out and you look at the corner on the concrete, you'll see that they have to manipulate the corner. Now, typically, we don't build formwork for that corner. We would just, when we take the formwork off, we'll knock the corner off, so it's not quite so sharp in the corner. But it's the same problem. You have to figure out how to meet these pieces together. So now that I have that, I can trim off the extra pieces. But I want to point something else out before I actually do the trimming. And that is that when I'm trying to orbit around the object, it's difficult. So I try to right-click and orbit, and you see how the object kind of moves quickly from one side to the other. And if I got in a little bit tighter, it tends to jump, and it's really hard to work with. We can, in Rhino, recenter the zoom and the orientation of the object, or the orientation of the view, based on a particular object. So if I use the zoom command, if I type Z for zoom and followed by enter, I can then, in my options here, use S or type S for selected, and it's going to zoom in just on that triangle that I created. It's also going to recenter the orbit around that triangle, which makes it really easy to look at what's happening in my object. So now it's easy to see that this plane here extends past my object. This plane here also extends past the corner. And this plane stops right at the corner. So let's use the triangle, and let's use a trim command. I'll pick the trim command from right here, and I'll trim off this surface and that surface. I've got a little bit left. There we go. I'll hit enter when I'm done, and now I'm left with just that little triangle in the corner, which is perfect. I'll go ahead and use a surface from 3 or 4 corner points, and I'll do a surface 1, 2, 3, and hit enter. And now I've filled in that corner right there. Yeah?
So can we trim it like before we do like triangle and we just trim the lines?
You need some form of an object to trim. So if, for example, on this side, I don't have the triangle yet, I could trim off this triangle here, but I can't trim it back to here because I don't have a line there for where the trim. So if I were trimming, for example, it's going to say select cutting object. Okay, well, I could use this as a cutting object, and I could trim off that, but that's as far as I can get because I don't have an object to trim with there. So instead, I'll draw that triangle. I'll go from here to here, and actually, technically, I only really need those 2 sides of the triangle. But if you draw it as a whole triangle, a lot of times it's easier to see what's happening. Now that I have that, I can trim off these 2 pieces. So I'll type trim, and we'll get rid of that, and we'll get rid of that. Sometimes it leaves little bits of extra, so you have to zoom around and orbit. All right, that looks pretty good. I'll hit enter to finish, and then I can do a surface from 3 or 4 corner points, 1, 2, and 3. Alternatively, you could patch it. You have a closed curve. Either way. So now I've done that on this corner and on that corner. I have the same issues over here that I have to fix, but I haven't done the chamfers yet. I'm not going to do all the corners. You don't need to watch me repeat. However, you guys are going to do all the corners, which is going to get you a lot of practice with how these things work and how to manipulate. So believe me, all of this is done on purpose. So let's continue on down. I made it to the bottom. I'd like to chamfer this one. So chamfer surface. It's going to be this to this. And luckily, that makes a nice corner, so I don't have to worry about it. This, however, isn't going to make a nice corner. So if I chamfer surface from here and there, you see that my chamfers don't actually match. There's a little gap that's created there. So this really isn't a problem if I was just rendering from back here, because you're never going to see that gap. However, if I was going to 3D print this object, it would be a problem, because the 3D printed object needs to be watertight. And so this is something that we'll go through later on in the semester about these kinds of objects and being able to 3D print, because that's part of what you're going to learn in this class. So for right now, even though it doesn't matter from a render's perspective, we're going to make an adjustment. And I'll show you how we'll adjust that in just a second. Let me go ahead and finish chamfering the rest of the sides. So I'll chamfer surface, and we'll do this side. We'll do that side. We'll do that. That. Etc. Okay? So I've gone ahead and I've worked my way around. I'm not going to chamfer this edge here, because dealing with this inside corner is really difficult. And so I'm not going to make you guys do that. That can remain straight. I'm okay with it. Furthermore, I'm not going to chamfer this edge right there, because it's already not very steep. So it doesn't need a chamfer. There's not much that could be gained by doing that. If you want to chamfer this and this, you can, but it adds to the complexity of this corner. I will do one with it and one without it, and I'll leave that as your option. So I'm here, and I need to start dealing with how am I going to change this particular point. So the first thing that I can do is I can use my Polyline tool, and I could say, let me draw a line from right here at that point down to the edge right there. And so that line is a slightly tapering line, but I could trim off the part of this surface that I don't need. So I could get rid of that part of the surface using this line. So I can go ahead and I can type trim, and I can trim off that piece. So that by itself helps a little bit. This piece, oops, let me hit enter. This piece doesn't quite fit there yet. So I have two options. I can just delete that piece altogether, and I could do a new surface from 3 or 4 corner points. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that's probably the easiest solution. Now, I should point out that this surface that I just created isn't quite a flat surface. It has a slight twist to it. Does that matter in the grand scheme of things? Absolutely not. Will it 3D print fine? You bet. Will it render great? Absolutely. So I'm not going to worry that it has a little bit of a twist to it. But it is something to point out. So I can do it that way. The other option would be to come back to where I had this and to modify this object. And I can do that by turning on my edit points, or excuse me, my control points. It's this button here, right there. And I get points for my particular object. So there's a point. The problem is this object's already been trimmed off. So I have a little bit of this object that I still need to manipulate that isn't there. So even if I move this point, come on, let me turn on my point snap here. Here we go. Even if I move that point to right there, which is what I would be doing, I'm still missing part of this. So I actually need to use a command called untrim, which is the opposite of trimming, to get that piece back. So by the way, untrim is awesome, because if you trim something and later on you decide you don't want it trimmed, you can untrim that piece. So nice. There's a few other pieces here. I've bent this just a little bit. So let me turn back on my points. I need to manipulate these 2 points as well. So that point needs to come up to be perpendicular, and that point there needs to be perpendicular. And now that surface has been modified to fit. I introduced that to you just so that you realize you can modify a surface, though the truth is it's a lot simpler to just pick the 4 points and go with it. Okay? So I've gone ahead and I've fixed it so that that's nice and sharp at that corner. That's also looking pretty good. On the other side over here, I said I was going to do it if I chamfered this as well. So chamfer surface, there and there. I now have that part chamfered. So here we just added to the complexity, because it's no longer just this corner that we have to match up, it's this corner. So here is a good place where the triangle can help. So we'll go from there to there, down to there, and back up to there. That's creating this little triangle, which will help some of this, but not all of it. Let me type Z for zoom, S for selected to recenter my zoom around this so we can start to see what's happening. So we can trim off this piece, which we don't need. So trim, and we'll get rid of that right there. I can't trim, this piece is already okay. I can't trim off this piece because the triangle doesn't match up. So let me go ahead and draw a line from this corner down to that center. I will use that line as a trim for that surface. There we go. And once again, I'll just delete this surface rather than modify it. And I'll do a surface from 3 or 4 corner points. It would be 1. Whoops, helps if I pick my point correctly. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Looks like I made a mistake on the end of that one. And then on this one, I still have to fill in that little triangle in the corner. So it would be 1 more. 1, 2, and 3. I'll hit enter, and there it is. Like I said, I made a little mistake. That one went a little too far, so let me do a trim. And I can trim that out as well. So you guys are going to work through all of your corners to make sure that they're all nice and clean. And that's a large part of what you're doing today, getting used to zooming and interacting with your object. Now, if I were actually drawing this object from scratch, I would not model all 4 corners. I would model 1/4 of it and mirror it, and then mirror the quarters, so that I'm really only modeling one set of it. To show you how that would work, let me just copy this really quick and move it over here. Now, I don't want you to do it today because I want you guys to learn this process a little bit better. But I will show you in just a second. Okay, so I would have only modeled this quarter. I would have got it set up exactly how I wanted it to be set up. And then I would take this and then mirror first along this plane there. And then I would take these two and mirror them along that plane. So it saves you. You only have to do one set of corners, and then you have it the same on all sides. But again, I want you to go through the practice. I like to show you this because it's the short way, but I also want you to go through the practice of doing all the corners because you'll learn so much in doing the corners. And it is important for you to get that practice at this stage, especially with the zooming in, zooming out, and controlling the screen and working with your objects. So once all of this is done, it's going to be time to assign a material to this. Did I ask you to do a material or not? Hold on a second. Yep. I do say to assign a material. That's good. So we're going to do that. So first thing I'm going to do is load up the V-Ray toolbar. So I'll go up to Tools. I'll go to my toolbar layout. I'll go to the File menu within the Rhino options here. I'll go to Open. And on my flash drive in my Resources folder, there's my V-Ray for Rhino toolbars. And we'll go ahead and load those in. I apologize that you have to do it every time, but it's the nature of the computers. So those are loaded in. It's time to bring in a material. I'll go to my material right here, my material editor. Right now I have no scene materials. I need a new scene material. I'll right-click on scene materials and say load material. I'm going to go ahead and go to my flash drive in my resources, and I'll load up some concrete. And I'm just going to use the basic concrete. That's fine. There it is. I'll make sure it works by selecting the preview. Yep, it works. And now I need to either assign it to layer or to assign it to the object. I'll go ahead and just assign it to the object. I'll right-click on concrete and say apply material to selection. And I now have concrete applied to it. Because we're ultimately going to render this, it would be nice to go ahead and do the same things we did last class where I added an infinite plane underneath the object. Notice that my infinite plane intersects my object a little bit. I may need to select let's go back to wireframe here. And we'll move this. Sometimes it's easiest to move it in one of the side views so that it's above the plane. Should move my extra one here as well. And there it is. I also could use a directional light, so I'll use a little box to help me get this set up. There it is. Directional light is the hidden button right here. So again, this is all the stuff that we did last class. End of direction vector is right there. Start would be up there. That gives me my little light. And now I can go ahead and do a rendering of this. And I should get a nice little concrete bridge. Now the concrete's not going to be perfect. It's not texture mapped correctly. The scale is going to be slightly off. But this is ultimately what we're looking for to get out today. Okay? So you're going to apply that material, you're going to do a little rendering, and then you're going to post this rendering. That's the piece that I want and I'm looking for today. So it's repeating some of the stuff from last class, and this is where I said every class builds on itself. So we did rendering stuff. Today wasn't about V-Ray and it wasn't about rendering. However, I have an expectation that you remembered what we did last class, and at the end you'll be able to do this. Does that make sense? So we're building little steps. So you'll spend the bulk of your time today building this object and fine-tuning it and dealing with the corners and trimming those corners and everything. Then you'll go ahead and assign a material, give yourself an infinite plane below your object, and then give yourself a little directional light. So you have some light in your scene, and then you'll go ahead and render it out and post the rendering. Are there any questions about this? No? Perfect. So I'll turn you loose, and you guys can go through this learning curve. Next class, like I said in exercise 206, will be similar to this. We're making a completely different object using completely different commands. But it's still about learning the commands and working with the objects. So we'll go from there. If you have questions, let me know. And that's it. For everybody or for you? OK. Give me a second to save this, and then I'll be over.